The first fundamental we will look at is the comments. To include a comment to describe part of the code, you must start the statement with a hash. A comment may appear at the start of a line or following a white space or a code, but not within a literal. All comments are ignored in Python. It is particularly important to add comments to describe variable definition or part of your program because it is very easy to lose track of what you have done in your code or for other people who would like to use your code. Another fundamental for Python, just like other programming languages, is that it uses variables. Variables are basically names that represent values stored in the computer memory. The values stored in a computer memory are able to change. The variables in Python are automatically created as soon as they are initialized. Normally, the variables are defined when they are assigned a value. When a variable represents a value stored in the memory, we normally say that the variable references the value. So, how do you create a variable? In Python, the assignment statement is actually an equal sign. For example, the variable num is assigned the value 20. In this case, the variable name num or the name num represents the variable and the value 20 is stored in the memory location. So what this means is that the variable will be automatically created and it will reference the value 20. Let us try it out in Jupyter Notebook. If you have not installed Anaconda distribution which comes with Jupyter Notebook, please watch my previous video. Now we can go ahead and start Anaconda distribution. We go to search, Windows search, and type Anaconda distribution and select under best match, click on it, and we can go ahead and launch Jupyter Notebook. We can go ahead and start a new Jupyter Notebook with Python 3. Once you click on it, this is the landing page. You rename this to Python fundamentals, and then you click on rename. So the first thing that I'll do is convert this cell to Markdown, and I can go ahead and have the level 1 topic. All you need to do is just start with a hash sign, and now you can write whatever the topic is. And then the first thing we want to do is I'll show you how to add comments. For you to add comments, you have to start with hash. So in this code cell, make sure that now this is a code. We can add our comments. Remember we said that comment may appear at the start of a line. So we can add a comment. You have to start with a hash and you put a space, and then you can say something like that's, you can add a comment like that. That can be a comment. And also it can also appear after a code. You can say something like digits. Maybe we assign a value like 25, and then we can add another comment. This is another way of adding a comment. You can add hash, and then you can say also following a code. This here, this is a piece of code, and this is, we'll look at it later, but this is a variable and has been assigned a value 25. So this is another way of adding a comment. Also, we have another way. We can have a white space, and you can add a comment after white space. So you can say also following following a white space. White space, that's another way. So these three, all of them represents a comment in Python. In some instances, if a string character starts with a hash, it does not qualify to be a comment. For example, because the whole of this is a string. A string is just a data type where it's enclosed within these quotes. So this is not a comment. So what happens is that Python will automatically ignore any comment, but it will recognize this. This is now a code. This is another code where a variable of string type has been created in the memory. And this is just one way of having a comment. So they will be ignored. The next thing we want to do is create some variables. And now we can go ahead and initialize a variable. Remember, a variable will always be initialized using an assignment statement, which is equal sign, and then followed by the variable itself, the value. Now in this case, we can say that the value 20 is assigned to a variable named num. We can go ahead and print the value. You can say print num, and if you execute that, you can either click on this run button here on the left side of that code cell to execute, or you can hold the control key and hit enter. Num is a variable, which means that it can take different values. You can say, if you decide to change the value of num to 23 and execute again, maybe control enter, the value of num becomes 23. That's why it's called a variable, because it usually take different values during the execution. There's also something else we call variable reference. Variable reference means that a variable is just the name given to the memory location. In this case, for example, here, the num is a variable name, and 23, where 23 is saved in the computer memory, that is what we call memory location. So the variable num usually point to the location where that is a certain memory location where a value of that variable can be stored. It can be 23, it can be 50. So it doesn't matter. We will now look at variable reference versus copy. Whenever the variable is used, it takes the value by referring to it in memory. It does not take value from a copy. For example, when num1 references the value 20 stored in the computer memory, and num2 references num1, num2 refers to the same object as num1, i.e., the two variable points to the same memory location where the value 20 is stored. In this case, Python uses referencing to memory. This is particularly important when working with large datasets, as you do not need to reserve computer memory for the same dataset. Going back to Jupyter Notebook, I'll show you how this is done. We might decide, for example, say initialize num1 equal to maybe 20, and then we can also have another variable num2 that is assigned num1. So if you decide to print, for example, the value of num1, you realize that the value is 20. If you decide again now to print the value of num2, you realize that both of them are equal to 20. So something that you should realize is that num2 is using a variable rather than a value. So what happens here is that we don't create another variable. Remember that variable points to a certain memory location. But in this case, since num2 is referencing num1, it means that it doesn't take the value from a copy of num1. What it does, it takes the value stored in the computer memory that is being pointed by num1. So in this case, it's going to that memory location where there's a value 20 being saved, and now that's why it does return the value 20. So basically, we can see that num1 and num2 are both pointing to the same object. There is a clear difference between variables and constants. Variable is used to measure characteristic of interest that can take different values. The value stored in a computer memory can change during program execution. On the other hand, a constant is a quantity that has a fixed value. Once stored in a computer memory, constant does not change during program execution. A good example is pi, which takes on the value 3.14159. Let us go back to Jupyter Notebook to see this. Let us now look at how to initialize a variable and a constant. To differentiate the two, I'll use an example where we can get the area of a circle. We usually say it's pi multiplied by radius squared. The value of pi doesn't change. They usually remain the same, but the value of radius can change. You will have pi to be a fixed value, and we can have our radius r to be a variable. To define fixed value as a constant name, what we do, we usually use all uppercase. So in this case, to define it, we have fixed value. All these should be assigned a value 3.14159, and radius is our variable. So constant should be all uppercase, and for the radius should be all lowercase. So now we can decide what is the value of radius that you want to use. We can decide to use a radius of 10. So we can say the area of circle is assigned constant value of pi and multiply it by the value of radius multiplied by radius. So we might as well decide to print area of that circle. If you run this, you actually get the value of 314.159. So that's how you are able to differentiate between a fixed value constant, and a variable by the way you define them. So, how do we name our variables in Python? Just like other programming languages, there are some rules to adhere to when naming variables in Python. Variable names must start with a letter or an underscore. Variable names cannot contain white spaces or punctuations. Variable names may contain letters, numbers 0 to 9, and underscores. Something else to note is that variable names are case sensitive and should never be Python keywords. There are several variable naming conventions, most of which are not mandatory, but very vital for readability of code and avoiding confusion. Variable names should be all lowercase, while constants should be in uppercase. Variable names should be short and descriptive. For variable names made up of multiple words, use either underscore to separate the words or use CamelCase to represent the two words. Whichever approach you choose, please be consistent. Class names should always start with an uppercase letter. A single leading underscore should be for private identifier and two leading underscore used for a strong private identifier. The next thing that we're going to look at here in Jupyter Notebook is how to name our variables. A good example is the name of a person. We can have a name and say something like Matthew. If you print name, it's gonna print out name. That's a very good variable name. It's all lowercase and it starts with a letter. We can have it starting with underscore. Still, this will be recognized as a variable. But then let's try something else. Let's try it to start with a 1. Let's see what happens if you do this. Voila. Says syntax error, invalid syntax. The reason is because it can't start with a digit between 0 to 9. It can only start with a letter or underscore. The next thing I want to show is that we can have the same here. We can have letters and numbers or underscores. So you can have this one underscore, name underscore 1 underscore 1. This is valid variable name. But then let's try something else. What if we decide to have this to be our first name? First name, and we have the space. Let's see what happens if you try to have a white space in the variable name. What happens? You get invalid syntax. What this means is that you can never have a white space in the variable name. If you have multiple words that you want to use for your variable name, what you should do, you should either use an underscore between the two names, between the two words, or you can have something like maybe last name and say my last name. Let me just use my last name. And you can have something like this. So first name is Matthew, so we need to have an underscore. So rather than having an underscore, we can have CamelCase. The first letter is lowercase, but the first letter of the second word is capitalized. So these two are valid variable names. And something else you should know is that variable names are case sensitive. For instance, I initially defined first underscore name, which is all lowercase. Then you decide, look, Let me just change this to try to call maybe first name with the F being uppercase. If you try to execute this, what does they tell you name, first name is not defined. The reason is because this is not recognized as small. So these are two different variables. These are two different approach. Either use underscore or CamelCase. In your program, it's always recommended that don't mix the two approaches. The next thing I would like to say is that variable names can never be Python keywords. All these words that are here can never be used for. You can never use these for your variable names because there will be a conflict, and that will cause problems for your program. So make sure that you never use these words. These are the keywords in it. And I think that's it for the naming conventions. But if you have any question, you can type in the comment section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part of this Python programming tutorial. And please do remember to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell